Hey, this is Hunter with Lone Star Woodworking, and today I make my most beautiful table to date, try some new sandpaper, make a few mistakes, and find some interesting ways to fix them. Stay tuned. So this build started with this really big, awesome piece of California Redwood, and I feel very fortunate to have been able to work with this wood for a couple of reasons. One, I'm in the Houston area. We don't come by slabs like this very often, and especially not in this species. Two, you can't cut down these trees anymore, so you have to pretty much be lucky enough to go salvage one and then sell them for thousands and thousands of dollars, which leads me into my third point. I got this slab totally free. I found this guy on Facebook Marketplace. He was keeping it in some storage container, and I asked for a little bit of history on it because, I don't know, it just seemed a little weird to be giving away something like that. And he said that either his great-grandfather or great-great-grandfather cut it down in the 20s because they were an arborist, thought that the slab was super cool, so they took it home and made a coffee table out of it. This story was a little strange because live edge furniture wasn't really all that popular until the 60s, and then back in the 20s, arborists were looking for the entire tree so that way they could make dimensional lumber. So they didn't want any of the slabs that they happened to cut. They just left them on the forest floor. Now, I'm not one to look a gift horse in the mouth, so I said thank you. I took the slab and I started making a plan on what to do with it. And here you can see that I am making a circular form. I didn't have any particular reason to make a circular form. This isn't for a client. It is for sale, it's just not for a client. I just took a little bit of creativity or creative freedom with it. And you can see that I wanted my final dimensions to be a little bit bigger than a standard sheet of melamine, so I had to put that little extender piece on there. And this little circle cutting jig is absolutely awesome. I've used it to cut all of my circular pieces. If you guys are interested in it, I can definitely make a video on how to make it. It's super easy. So for the sides, I'm just using this composite edging that you can get from Home Depot. It doesn't stick to epoxy, so it peels off super easy. And once the sides were on, I meticulously caulked every single seam. And the reason I am more meticulous with this kind of form rather than a square form is because with the type of edging that's on there, you as a human will probably make a mistake, leave too much of a gap, forget to put a screw in, and then you're out all of that epoxy and you pretty much just have to start over wherever you happen to end up. After the form was built, my buddy Caleb came over because he wanted to learn how to start doing some of this, and he helped me kind of trace out the orientation that we wanted for the slab. We decided on that second line, furthest over to the right side of your screen that I'm pointing at right now, because it allowed us to keep a little bit more interesting grain features. We took the jigsaw to it, and this stuff is super soft, so it made really, really short work of it, and we're going to keep those offcuts because as you can see here, there's a lot of dead space, and epoxy is expensive, so I want to use as little epoxy as possible. So we cut off some of these little filler pieces, and I started getting pretty excited here because you can already see some of the kind of crazy grain patterns, even with that roughing on it. But that excitement was put away pretty quick when I found this gap, which means that we were going to have to plane it down because that is just way too much of a gap for me to justify leaving there. So luckily with Caleb there, this went pretty smoothly, pretty easily. We had to use this little rinky-dink setup with my planer holding the slab down. It was too big for my workbench, otherwise I obviously would have used that for safety purposes, but we made it work and we got it done with no injuries. We also got a first look at what the clean grain looked like. So with the slab now flat and sitting in the form nice and flat, I went ahead and started prepping the form for the epoxy pour. And here I'm using just some generic mold release. I think you can get this stuff on Amazon. And whenever it comes to airborne stuff, just wear your mask. It's the smart thing to do. Nobody wants to develop any kind of lung problems. I don't care if you're young, old, middle-aged, just wear your mask. So after we got everything put in there, we clamped it down nice and tight and started mixing the epoxy. And something that I don't hear people talk about too much is that kind of opaque look that resin and hardener have whenever they are first poured together. Poured, not mixed. Obviously, once they're mixed, they're perfectly clear. So I like to mix my epoxy while it's still clear, so that way I can see when it gets, that perfect clarity and I know everything's mixed together properly. Add my pigment because it takes like 10 seconds to mix that stuff. And I am using Kokio Black. It's one of iCandy's new paste pigments. It's jet black, looks really good. But it obviously looked a little too good because I got really overexcited, kind of jumped the gun, poured way too much. I think I poured 6 gallons in this. I should have known that in this Texas heat in the middle of freaking July, this wasn't going to go well for me. I got lucky, though. I wasn't done pouring. I knew I was going to have to come back and top it off. But learn from me, don't make yourself have to get lucky with your projects for them to be a success. All right, with that epoxy dry, it was time to get it off the workbench and onto the sawhorses over here and start to demold it. This process is pretty straightforward. Just take out all of your screws. I think I put way too many in here. And make sure you take out all of them because otherwise you're going to see what happens here in a second. And this stuff just peels right off. Unless you leave a screw in there, then it's going to be a little difficult. And when I tried to pop the bottom off, that formerly should have made this really easy, but for some reason, it just kept doing that. And I tried it all over the slab. It kept doing that. So what I ended up having to do is try to plane it off. And I tried first with my little DeWalt hand planer here. That wasn't going well. So I ended up getting smart, putting it on the ground and planing off the entire side of Melamine with my router, flipping it over and working on the top, which is what I'm doing here. Sometimes it just goes like that. All right, but once I got all of that wood exposed, there were still some low spots that need to be topped off, so I created some dams and did just that. And here you'll get a better idea of what I mean by that kind of opaque look. So that was the hardener, there's the resin, opaque look. Mix it together, perfectly clear. Then add your pigment, boom, it's done in like 4 seconds. All right, so then you just top it off, and you can see here that it's kind of wanting to move towards one side, so I had to level it out a little bit, no big deal. Once it was dry, I had to break out that planer again, and I'm sure this is a really good tool. I know that I'm probably not using it correctly. I know that epoxy is super hard on blades, but I am really just not good with this tool. It's not my favorite tool in the world to use, and I actually try to use it as little as possible. But it has come in handy, when I've needed it. I'm sure it's somebody's favorite tool. But after I was done with all of that, I decided to get the table to its final dimensions. I wasn't able to film it. I can't remember if my phone either died or overheated, but this is the important part. You don't want to go all the way through. You want to cut halfway, maybe 3/4 of the way through, come back with your jigsaw, and leave a little bit of a lip. The reason being is because you will need your flush trim bit right here, and it can ride along that perfectly clean edge that your initial router made, and it will leave a nice clean edge for you. And router work is my favorite thing to do, so I always love having to do this kind of stuff. Once that edge was nice and uniform, I went ahead and did an initial sanding with 40 grit, just to kind of get rid of any of the extra crap that I missed or didn't take off with my router. And you can see this stuff is absolutely gorgeous. All right, guys, we are about halfway through the video, and if you've made it this far and if you're still enjoying the content, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe. If you think all I've earned is a like, great. If you think all I've earned is a dislike, go for it. I won't hold it against you. If you want to give me some advice, tell me that there's something I could have done better, go ahead and comment. I'll respond. If you want to compliment, insult, or troll me, go ahead and comment. I'll respond. I will respond to each and every comment. I want to interact with you guys as much as possible, whether it be positive or negative. And I just want you guys to know that no matter what kind of interaction I get, no matter what kind of support I get, I appreciate every last bit of it, and I can't wait to have every single one of you along for the ride. All right, back to the build. In case you didn't know what I was doing the entire time I was talking, it's just inlaying these C-channels. These are some of the basic half-inch C-channels that you can get from Home Depot. I like to mount them upside down, which is why I'm hogging out all that material. And, you know, I feel like there's a million videos out there on how to inlay these. If you want me to make a video on it, I more than happily will, but I'm just letting you know there's a lot of other videos already made, so that way you don't have to wait on me. And this actually came back to bite me in the butt because I greatly overestimated how thick my table was, and I actually ended up punching one of those screws directly through the top. I was able to fix it, and with no short amount of panic, because, you know, this is thousands of year old wood. I might have ruined it. I did end up fixing it, but unfortunately didn't film it. So here I put an epoxy base coat on the table. And I did this for one reason and one reason only. I follow Blacktail Studio. I've been following him for a while. And he just finished up a redwood wall art piece. And during his finishing process, he was playing around with a lot of stuff. And he found that if you put an epoxy base coat and then finish it, it adds a lot of depth to the natural grain that redwood has. So I decided to go ahead and do that. And you see that it kind of like dramatically changes. So I started sanding it up to 120, kind of taking off that epoxy coat just little by little. But once you get to 120, I started fixing all the little pits and easy fixes with some CA glue and activator. And they're really annoying, but it's necessary. I also found some spots that I really didn't like in the epoxy, and this is actually just the wood. The wood just is ugly. So I dug out some of those spots and also some spots where some little air bubbles were trapped and started filling them with black epoxy. Came back the next day and cleaned it up. No big deal, it's just part of it. All right, then I flipped it over, sanded the bottom up to 120, fixed all the little pits that needed to be fixed. And while it was flipped over, I was going to go ahead and add the 22-degree chamfer that I like on my pieces. And what's really cool about this is that it has a dust collection, and this is something you can get off of Amazon. It fits most routers, and it makes life so much easier. You remember the mess I made with my flush trim bit? Well, look at this. You can see how kind of up in that bulb towards the collar, it is kind of piling up, but it immediately gets sucked up, and watch what happens when I get to the epoxy. It bunches up really bad, but then you just back off a little bit, sucks it right up, and you just keep on going. And there's hardly any mess. It's great. And then if you're going to uncover a bunch of material, you're obviously going to have all these little fixes. No big deal, just some CA glue and activator, quick fix. Maybe 30 minutes worth of work. And then I jumped the gun a little bit. I didn't even start sanding that side. You can still see where that dirty spot was. With the bottom sanded and now perfectly flat, I really wanted to see what this base looked like. This base is from Flowy Line. This is his tulip design. And this thing went with the table so well. The process for attaching it is exactly the same as the C-channels. Again, if you're curious, just ask. I will make a video. I don't care if it's just one person. I'll do it. But for right now, just enjoy this really sped up montage of putting in some threaded inserts and attaching the base just to see what it looks like. And here I just tried to see if it would wiggle. Nope, it's really, really sturdy. All right, now that I satisfied that curiosity, I went ahead and started sanding the bevel. Be really, really careful. Use a really high grit and go slow because you don't want to mess up the proportions of that flat side and the chamfer. And I'm adding a 1/4 inch round over. Most people do an 1/8, but with the 1/4 inch, I feel like it's just easier on your elbows, and I don't think it takes away from the shape of the table too much. All right, now I am starting the finish sanding. So I'm starting at 150 and working my way all the way up to 320. Using my inspection light and a microfiber cloth between each grit, making sure that my consistency is good. I'm also sanding the sides with the corresponding grit to the top. So I sand the top at 150, I sand the sides at 150. I sand the top at 320. I sand the sides at 320. Again, being super careful. I should have just used my hand and held some sandpaper, but I didn't. I got impatient. I mean, it is what it is. All right, now we move on to the best part of any project, which is the finish. I am using Rubio Monocoat here. If you have watched my last video, I only have 2 at this point, but if you watched my last video, I said I was going to be using a certain other product. The project that I used that product on ended up failing horribly. I actually need to refinish the entire thing. I'm not going to name the product. I'm not going to bash one product just to give credit to another. Instead, I'm just simply going to say that Rubio Monocoat offers the best longevity and protection out of any of the finishes that I've used. All of the projects that I've used Rubio Monocoat on have not come back with any complaints. However, anytime I've used a polyurethane, a lacquer, anything like that, it has come back with some complaints, and I've had to go back and refinish, sometimes after a year, sometimes after 2, sometimes never. But with this, it has always been never. What's also really great about it is that, I'm in a garage. There's dust all the time. I get a good wind gust. There's dust blowing everywhere. And if you're using a urethane or a lacquer, that stuff is going to create little dust nibs, and it's going to create an uneven finish, and it's going to be kind of ugly and really, really annoying to try to deal with. So with this stuff that's basically buff on, buff off, it's super easy. It doesn't matter if you have a dusty shop. So you wait 15 minutes after you apply it, and then you just come back with rags and you just keep wiping off the excess until it's all gone. And after that first coat, you can see that there are some dry spots. I expected that. Redwood is extremely porous. This is not something that I didn't see coming. Now, this I wouldn't recommend. I used 800 grit. Don't do that. There's a maroon pad that you see a lot of people work with that is better at sanding that Rubio. This worked, but I would not try it again. I think it worked on a fluke. I don't think that that's the right way to do this. So don't do what I did. Use the maroon pad. It still worked. It gave that really nice sheen to Rubio Monocoat. It bumped it up from a matte to a satin. And in fact, here you can still see my reflection actually, which I thought was super impressive. But what I want to point out is that there is epoxy flakes and dust all over this table just 15 minutes after I finished it, and it's all wiping off, and I have a perfect finish. And unfortunately, this is the best full picture I can get for you guys. The actual nice kind of semi-professional pictures are going to be on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Those should be in my YouTube bio. If they're not, I will put them in the description. But guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something, and I hope to see you next time. See ya.